Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and...
I'm Joe.
He looks like he's going to pass out. This is part 2 of The Hat Man with Rook Stone. Welcome back, Rook.
Thank you for having me yet again. All right, so we are discussing the Hat Man, and in specific, the Hat Man as influenced by the internet today. So can you briefly recap what you got out of the last episode we did?
There is a scientific or medical explanation that if you stimulate a certain part of the brain, a person will have a sense that there's another figure next to them, which is probably just in some way their own sense of where they are in time and space. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Joey? What about the psychologist?
Yes.
The psychologist wants you to imagine him at all times.
Are you going to talk to the Hat Man all day? He's not amused.
No. So there was advice from a psychologist for how to deal with your terror of the Hat Man in the night, and that is to think positively of him during the day, which apparently some people find a little unsettling.
Yeah.
All right. So any phenomenon that people experience today is going to automatically have an influence from the internet because it influences everything. You share a story, you share it on the internet, and that is how other people are going to absorb it in that framework. The current modern experience of the Hat Man is now a creature of the internet. It is no longer something happening in the shadows, but it is all over TikTok. And this can be traced back to 2008, which is long before modern social media.
Yes, before TikTok, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And in 2008, Timothy M. Brown Jr. began curating a blog where anyone, absolutely anyone, could write in with their experience of the Hat Man. And he wanted to make sure that he gave a space for everybody.
Mm.
So I'm going to read you Timothy's own account of his first experience with the Hat Man.
Okay.
My experience with the Hat Man came in 1994 when I was about 14 years old. I was living with my grandmother and great-grandmother at the time at my home in Nashville, Tennessee. I had been staying up really late that night, and about 2 a.m. in the morning, I found myself lying in bed and nodding off as I was watching TV. The lights were all off, and the only light that was lighting my room was coming from the TV set in front of me. From where I was laying in my bed, looking down towards my feet, I had a clear view all the way into and through my great-grandmother's room, which was just parallel to mine, as there was no door between my room and hers. I could also see into the hallway just on the far side of her room. Just inside the hallway was the doorway going into my grandmother's room. As I was lying there with the covers pulled up to my face, nodding off, my eyes would open and fall over and over again. Then, at some point, something I heard on TV made a noise and caused me to wake up and open my eyes a little wider. Only this time, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I had always had a fear about intruders and what I would do if someone ever broke into our home. For a brief moment, I thought that the movement I was seeing might be my grandmother getting up to go to the bathroom. But as I moved my eyes more into focus, looking down through my great-grandmother's room into the hallway, I very quickly realized that it wasn't my grandmother. What I saw gripped me immediately with fear and dread. I saw a tall, human-like figure, and the figure looked like that of a man. The man had no distinguishable features whatsoever. I could see no eyes, no nose or mouth, only blackness. He looked like a shadow, only darker, much darker. He had a very wide-brimmed hat and a long trench coat that flowed as he moved. I started to tremble. My heart began to race. At that moment, I came to the conviction that there was indeed an intruder in my house. As I watched him move, in the back of my mind, I began to play out scenarios as to what he and I were going to do. Was I going to yell? Was I going to get up and run after him and try to fight him? I kept looking into the hallway. He stood there at the threshold between my and great-grandmother's room and my grandmother's room. He leaned his head and body into my great-grandmother's room and looked in, turning his head toward her and then toward me.
Oh my God.
I had my eyes closed as much as I could so I could still see him and yet still look like I was sleeping. He stood there for what seemed like an eternity, just staring. He then moved very slowly and without sound back into the hallway just out of view. As I kept watching, I then saw this blacker than black figure move toward my grandmother's room. Just like before, he leaned his body and head in her doorway, looked at her, again not making a sound. He then leaned back and moved out of view into the hallway. At this point, I didn't know what else to do. I was convinced that we had some kind of burglar in the house, so I summoned as much courage as I could, jumped out of bed, yelling, and charged into the hallway, ready for a fight. I turned the hallway and he was gone. Obviously, my yelling and screaming startled and woke up my grandmother and great-grandmother. I told them what had happened, and needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep for a long time, and when we did, we left the light on. After my experience that night and during the next day, I spent a lot of time talking with my family about what had happened. I was surprised to know that my experience of the man with the hat and cape was not the only one that had happened in that house. As it turned out, both my grandmother and great-grandmother had seen the same thing. They told him.
I mean, did they see it before he?
No, they told him afterwards.
So, but I mean, did they see the Hat Man the same night that he saw the Hat Man?
No, they were asleep.
So at some earlier time they had seen the Hat Man. They just didn't tell him until after he told them. Okay, got it.
On other occasions. And this was the start of this as a recorded phenomenon widely spread on the internet.
Okay, so one thing Joey said when in the last time you came to visit us and you touched on the Hat Man in relation to a sleep paralysis story, and Joey said, I think Joey said that it could have something to do with when you're falling asleep and everybody becomes paralyzed at some moment when you're asleep, and then your brain is still dreaming and you just fill in the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be. And then the proliferation of it, because if somebody just keeps, if somebody talks about it, then the story kind of spreads and it gets a life of its own.
That is an issue. Shall I tell you, I have 2 more stories that I want to share from the blog. And again, Timothy shares everything that he sent. He does not want to censor anyone.
Okay.
All right. When I was a kid, maybe 9 or 10, I would stay up late at a friend's house down the block from me playing video games. One night, it got really late and started to rain. Every night, my friend would watch me walk from his house to mine down the block to make sure I got there safe. All was fine until that night. That night, when we went to go our separate ways, we saw him, the Hat Man, standing under a lamppost. A dark figure with a long-brimmed hat just standing there, staring at us. I ran home that night as fast as I could, not looking back or making eye contact, terrified. Later on, I began to think it was Odin from Norse mythology, but I still don't know. I still think about that night and wouldn't believe it unless my friend saw it too. So what do you think of that story?
They were totally awake.
Yeah, they were totally awake.
They were totally awake.
Although it could actually have been a person.
Yeah,
like
there's
a person standing under there.
There's literally nothing supernatural in what was described there. So a little kid in the dark,
right,
gets creeped out because he sees a man in a hat and gets spooked and runs away, and his friend sees it too.
Yeah, because it was really
maybe there was a man standing under.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking, when I was a little kid, I had a big dollhouse in my room and it had a chimney that stuck up. And at some point, someone had draped my coat over the chimney, probably didn't want to go and find a place to hang it up. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought for sure there was some hunchback creature in my room. And I was absolutely terrified. It took all my courage to jump up and run out of my room. And of course, by the time I hit the threshold of the door, I was screaming at the top of my lungs. And it was a coat hanging on a dollhouse chimney. So,
right. And you have to wonder about somebody who sees a man in a hat and panics and then just decides that it was Odin from Norse mythology.
Okay, so if I was at any age walking down the street and saw a man with a hat or not in the middle of the night, I would be scared because generally women are more at a disadvantage when it comes to walking around in the darkness if there's a man there. But I don't think I'd immediately assume it was somebody from mythology. I'd think it's a person standing there, whether they had a hat on or not, whether they had a long coat. I might think, well, that's weird. They got a long coat and a strange hat, but
yeah. So I believe that the person who tells the story is telling the truth about what they experienced, that they saw a man under a lamppost and it terrified them, and their friends saw it as well. I absolutely believe that happened. I see no reason to doubt that whatsoever. But I find it questionable that without anything even vaguely supernatural, that they jumped to Odin and then later the Hat Man.
it doesn't really fit the mold of the other stories.
It does not.
That you've told about the Hat Man. There's nothing really creepy about it other than their perception of it. They perceived that it was
right.
And maybe it was creepy, maybe it was something horrible, but yeah.
And it's possible that there was something inexplicable on an emotional level that they just don't have the writing ability to express.
True. Or that inexplicable on an emotional level that as a child they couldn't process it other than to say it was terrifying.
Right. And then I have another story.
Okay.
My name is Edward, and when I was around 10 or 11, we lived in a small town west of Austin, Texas. We had a trailer house that was adjacent to a house, and we lived in both. One night in the spring of 78 or 79, I was sleeping in my grandma's bed, waiting for her to come home and then go to my bed. I woke up.
Thing with the grandmas, man. I hope my grandchildren don't hear about this. They'll never want to come stay at my house.
I woke up sometimes in the late evening, upper body upright in the bed, dripping with sweat and just staring out the door of the room into the living room. I could not make out any features of what I was staring at. I was scared and terrified, frozen. I saw a figure with a brimmed hat, long trench coat, no features, shadow color, and dull looking. My grandmother walked into the room right through the shadow figure, and he disappeared. She saw me sitting upright, dripping with sweat, and asked me what was wrong with me. I told her I was okay and went to bed. I am 55 years old, and these days I struggle to remember some things. One thing in my mind that I can vividly remember is this incident when I was a kid. Knowing that others are experiencing the same thing is really mind-blowing, and it scares me a little for some reason every time I think about what happened.
Okay, I just have to say that I am 64 years old.
Yes, that was the first thing I
thought. I remember clearly, like my first sleepwalking time. I remember that clearly.
Yes.
There are other incidents that I remember clearly. Yeah, some things are faded, but emotionally charged incidents you remember clearly.
Yes, and 55 is not that old to like it. As soon as I read that, I thought, this is not written by a 55-year-old. That's not how you experience things as you age, that you're just like, yeah, I don't remember anything because I am an old man of 55.
55? Oh my God. That's weird. So that's probably somebody just trying to get,
yes, that was my exact impression of this one, because it doesn't match the archetype. It doesn't match what people have described more credibly.
Right. So did anybody give a story that you felt like, there might be something to this one?
There were some, but there's just such a deluge, and it's difficult to navigate the blog because he just puts them up as they come in. There's no way to sort it. So it's most of the recent ones are like this. It is just,
it's not indexed at all.
It's not indexed at all. Somebody, they saw the blog and they were like, hey, I remember something vaguely like that. And so they share something like the story about the two kids and Odin that I shared, or somebody sees it and they're like, I can write something creepy. And they make something up, which is my impression of the second one I read.
Yeah. I think you get a lot of that. You have to be kind of discerning because people, I don't know, they're not good writers, so they aren't convincing at all. It's just really stupid.
Yeah.
Okay, so it occurred to me as you've been talking that I actually have had an interaction with the Hat Man.
Have you?
And I've told you guys all about it, but I didn't perceive him as having a hat. It was before you were born, Rook, and I was laying in bed reading, and I didn't have my glasses on because I don't wear my glasses when I read. And I realized that there was a figure standing at the end of my bed. And it was very tall and thin. And I would say it was dark, but not dark like a color, but like a absence of light. And it was standing there and I felt absolutely no fear. And I thought, oh, that's weird. And then your father sat straight up in bed and turned like an automaton to me and said, you're one of the few pilgrims to have seen the other side. And that, coupled with seeing this figure at the end of the bed, freaked me out so bad. I jumped up and ran across the bed to get to the other side of the room and ran into the bathroom and spent the rest of the night sitting in the bathroom with the light on.
Good God.
Yeah.
So at this point, the Hat Man has transitioned from a private personal horror that people experience to creepypasta. And I know that you have mentioned Slender Man, so you're familiar with what creepypasta is. Yeah. It's kind of, at this point, it's kind of like an urban legend, but on the internet. Mm-hmm. That it's a story, generally fictional, but it is presented as though it's real. And I've seen a lot of them where it's very obviously a fictional story, that the person did not write it thinking that they could fool anyone into thinking it was real, but it's written as though it's real. It's like a specific art form. And there are people who do it to try to, hoax people, definitely, they are writing something fictional, but they want to scare people into thinking that it's real. But there are also a lot of people who just use it as an art form. There's a lot of novels that are written in the same way, where it's presented like, yeah, this is a thing that happened to me, and it's fiction. Mm-hmm. So there's this overlap with the creepypasta where you have people they're just having fun, just writing a story. Maybe they're really good at telling a story. Maybe they're really bad at telling a story. Maybe they are an 11-year-old who is pretending to be a 55-year-old man. But it's grown in the same way that Slender Man and other creepypasta figures have grown, and it's taken on a life of its own.
Wonder if there's any movies made.
Hat Man movies?
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time.
Wait a second. Have you ever heard of the Babadook movie?
Yes.
The premise of the movie is slightly different, but that's the same sort of thing.
It is a similar figure.
Literally the same looking figure, everything.
As we discussed before with parasomnias, because this is, oh gosh, we've done a lot of episodes on it, because you did one before me. Mm-hmm. They can be made worse by taking sleep aids. Mm-hmm. You take a lot of antihistamines maybe to try to fall asleep, some Benadryl, some NyQuil.
Alcohol, weed, anything like that. Yeah.
And you are more likely to experience insomnia, paradoxically, even though those things are depressants, or sleepwalking, night terrors, or sleep paralysis. And so there are people who have taken this up as a challenge. You take a bunch of Benadryl and you try to trigger sleep paralysis and visions of the Hat Man.
Oh, that's nuts.
It is. So I was able to find at least one death of a 13-year-old boy who overdosed on Benadryl. Mm-hmm. And the parents linked it to TikTok and these stories of, drugging yourself up on Benadryl to witness the Hat Man or to have other hallucinations.
So I wonder what part of the Benadryl killed him.
So I looked up the medical recommendations around Benadryl and the dangers of it. And as with anything, the poison is in the dose. You take enough, anything can kill you.
Yeah,
take
water can kill
you can die. Exactly. So it can lead to severe health problems if you overdose on Benadryl. It can cause heart problems, seizures, coma, and yes, death. I saw another story. This one was not related to the Hat Man or the internet whatsoever. A 45-year-old man took too much Benadryl and had a heart attack and died.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't common before because people weren't taking mass amounts of Benadryl at a time before.
They weren't taking it recreationally.
Exactly. But the problem is that people have seen it as a legal way to, do hallucinogens. And I know that, yes, it does work to have psychedelic experiences with antihistamines because I have accidentally done that myself. I live in California. Recreational cannabis is legal. And I made the mistake of eating a brownie. It was for pain. It didn't work. I've never had good luck with it for pain. But I ate a brownie that had cannabis in it, and it wasn't working. And my pain was getting worse, so I figured I'm just going to go to sleep. And so I took NyQuil. And then I spent the next 16 hours tripping balls.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And this for most people, they would have to take very large amounts.
Yeah, but most people have a tolerance level that's different.
Exactly. And I have a very low tolerance.
Yeah, most people are always taking different chemicals to treat different ailments or for recreation. And so it wouldn't affect most people.
Yeah,
or very mildly.
The smallest amount of THC affects me very strongly. A small amount of any kind of diphenhydramine, which is the chemical name for Benadryl, they knock me out. They affect me very strongly.
Well, I know a lot of people take NyQuil, and I think it might have diphenhydramine.
The active ingredient in that, and actually, technically speaking, I did not take NyQuil. What I took was the active ingredient, which helps me sleep, which is doxylamine succinate.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I took a half dose, which is all I ever take, and still for 16 hours. And my boyfriend at the time, now husband, he did not understand what was happening to me. So he thought I was mad at him because I would not speak to him. And when he would try to, he was like, do you want to have dinner? And I said, I cannot talk to you. I cannot eat. I just have to wait until this is over.
Well, okay. So as someone who doesn't drink alcohol or take any drugs or, very rarely even aspirin, the time I was in Nevada where cannabis is also legal, and I ate a gummy, and I would say that it wasn't terrifying, but it was definitely not normal thinking. And then Joey, you took one. Didn't you eat a gummy? And you said,
yeah, to sleep. And I think it worked to sleep, but it made my thought process very fragmented.
Yeah.
It wasn't good.
Yeah.
Good feeling.
So anyway, the upshot of all of that is to say that there's a movement of people taking drugs to stimulate dreams so that they can interact with the Hat Man
and other hallucinations. Yeah, basically a legal way for them to experience hallucinogen.
So do you think the Hat Man is a paranormal event, or is it just a modern equivalent of a story that's taken on a life of its own?
I think that the Hat Man, outside of the creepypasta, meme, all of that descriptions, is either a neurological phenomenon that follows a very specific pattern, and that's why so many people have seen this very specific pattern, that there's something about seeing the brim of a wide hat and a slightly indistinct body that you interpret as a cape or a coat, that there's something neurological going there triggering that, or there's something supernatural, maybe. I'm open to the idea that people experience things that I can't explain, but for anything that I have ever seen during my own sleep paralysis, absolutely, it is just bog standard, basic reality. Nothing supernatural, nothing particularly interesting other than to me. Do not seek the Hat Man. If he comes to you because you naturally experience sleep paralysis or other parasomnias, I would not personally suggest thinking happy thoughts about him during the day and picturing him a lot. I don't think that would actually help. But if you do not experience the Hat Man, do not try to trigger the Hat Man. Do not take more than the recommended dosage of an antihistamine. Do not take it for uses other than what is prescribed on the label. Do not do it, because the Hat Man might not kill you. The Hat Man might not be able to harm you, but pharmaceuticals can.
Yes.
And the Hat Man has a body count at this point. I just really don't want people to listen to this and then kill themselves. Okay?
No, I agree. I don't either. That would be bad. Well, I hope you sleep well and you don't have any interaction with the Hat Man. But if you do, don't tell me about it, okay?
Oh, I will. I'll tell you about his big smiling face. Just that big, beautiful face. Oh, look, he has flowers for you, Mama.
Oh, no. Thank you, Rook, for letting us know about this weird new danger of people misusing and abusing over-the-counter medications to elicit hallucinations so that they can interact with the Hat Man. I mean, that's so creepy. That's just so weird. And thanks for letting me know all about the Hat Man so that I don't have to look it up, because I would get freaked out. Our contact information is in the show notes, and as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us, and you could even come and visit us like Rook has, because we love to hear stories from all over the place. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.